Hello and welcome live to the World Crypto Network. Here live at Mises Institute, founded by the great Mary Rothbard. We are going to read the great book, In Defense of Freedom, a Conservative Credo by Frank S. Meyer. Personal collection of this guy, Mary Rothbard. Society is not a real entity. That which is not a determining cause, but merely a condition, cannot be considered independently as true end. It must be considered in subordination to that of which is a condition. Society and the state were made for individual men, not men for them. This was once a truism in America and through much of the West, but in the past few decades, all the prospering political ideology, communism and Nazism, socialism, the middle theories of the welfare state, have founded themselves upon the oppositive axiom. The individual men are secondary to society. True, all these societal views proclaim communism no less than the social worker servitors of the welfare state, that they are directed towards the welfare of men, or at least towards the greatest welfare of the greatest number of men. But in all of them, the ground of the value judgment upon which every crucial decision is based is the abstract construct, society. None of them ever take the person, nor in mass, nor in groups, minorities, but in his single majesty, one individual, as the criterion by which the validity of political and social decisions is to be judged. Great book, In Defense of Freedom. Welcome live here again to the World Crypto Network. You are joining us here again, once again, at the Mises University, the Mises Institute. And it's been an amazing week so far. We learned quite a bit. The lectures have been fabulous. Talking with the students has been amazing. And, well, it's all about Austrian economics. Yesterday, we did a 2.5-hour-long show just about Bitcoin. It was fabulous because talking with Austrian economists about Bitcoin is just fun. But guess who's joining us now? Live, we have Michael Goldstein, the one and only Bitstein, co-host of the Noted podcast and heavily involved in the Satoshi Nakamoto Institute. Michael, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I heard there was Austrian economics discussion with Bitcoin, so that's how you get me out of bed in the morning.
Exactly, right? That's how we Austrians, that's how we Bitcoin maximalists sustain ourselves, right? We just talk Bitcoin and we talk Austrian economics, right? So, Michael, how did you get into Austrian economics and what did you learn from Austrian economics that you can apply to Bitcoin?
So I first learned about Austrian economics sometime in high school. So this was 2009 or so. Someone sent me Leonard Reed's iPencil, as well as, I don't remember which Rothbard piece it was exactly, but within a couple paragraphs, a lot of things that this person had been saying about markets and capitalism automatically just clicked in my mind. And I declared myself an anarcho-capitalist then and there. And from that point, I was just devouring various works by Rothbard, Mises, and the whole rest of the crew, all the stuff you find on Mises.org. It was much more interesting than the stuff they were trying to teach me at school at the time. So I spent a lot of time reading and spent most of my college years, kind of digging into Austrian economics while I wasn't studying computer science for school. So that's kind of how I got in. We had an Austrian economics reading group at the University of Texas as well that I co-founded called the Mises Circle. So we were kind of nerding out on that until we came across Bitcoin, and then we were like, it was all Bitcoin after that. What did I learn for Bitcoin? I mean, basically everything. The reason that I'm interested in Bitcoin is because of my Austrian understanding of money and banking, and the importance of sound money in society. And prior to Bitcoin, I was a bit of a gold bug, and by a bit, end the Fed, reinstate a gold standard, all of that. But as soon as I came to understand Bitcoin, I mean, my original skepticisms was a misuse of the word fiat due to a sort of misunderstanding of what that truly means, as well as misunderstanding how Bitcoin operated. And, Bitcoin really forces an Austrian to take seriously the fact that a lot of these economic concepts, they're very psychological and subjective, as you learn from Mises. And with gold, it's Austrians are less forced to have to take that seriously and confront it head on. But when you get into Bitcoin and suddenly you have this working money that people are actually using for the purposes of whether it's to pay for something or for pure speculative purposes or for savings or whatever, they are using it, therefore showing that, the regression theorem has to be true, even if we don't fully understand the exact steps it took. And we just have to confront the fact that you can have an abstract money. In fact, all money is sort of this abstract ledger between, a community of individuals. Bitcoin is just a better one than gold. And gold was a good one because of certain physical properties that constrain what can be done with it, but Bitcoin is just better. So it was had I not read Mises and all the rest, Rothbard, Hoppe is one of my very favorites. Had I not read all these guys, Huerta de Soto, et cetera, I simply wouldn't have understood Bitcoin the way I do now. And just from the very beginning, the reason I've been interested in Bitcoin has less to do with the technology per se and more to do with my Austrian understanding of money.
Absolutely, Michael. I agree with everything you said. It is so important that you get educated in Austrian economics because it is the fundamental building block of Bitcoin. And I personally would not understand Bitcoin if it weren't for Rothbard's What Has Government Done to Our Money?
And it's a fantastic book, yeah. In fact, anyone listening who hasn't already dove into this, that's probably the best place to start. It's just it's such a simple book, and yet it explains basically everything.
Exactly, absolutely. And I think Bitcoin proves that Menger was not wrong, but he used a wrong term in his origins of money when he talked about the origins of money. But so did Rothbard and Mises. They talked always that a money needs to be a commodity first. So something tangible in the physical world that we can send from A to B and that we can sell, and property rights apply and prices apply, and we need to ration it, right? A scarce good.
Yes. Although it's been many years since I've read this, so unfortunately I don't remember a lot of definitional things. But there was a great paper by revisiting this topic, and I think the mistake there is also, once again, assuming that a commodity must be a physical, tangible good. And the only reason is because up until Bitcoin, there did not even exist the concept of a scarce digital good. So it made sense that up until 2009, you could not have a digital commodity. But today we do have at least one viable digital commodity, and it also happens to be very useful for the purposes of money. So I think it's just I don't think they were even wrong. It was just that they lived in a time where this type of good had no technological basis for existing, and we had to adapt to that.
Absolutely, yes. But I still hear many Austrians today saying that a money needs to be tangible. A money needs to be a real 3D role thing. But I disagree here because it does not. It only needs to be scarce. It just happens that Bitcoin is the first scarce good in a network of non-scarce good, the internet. If I have a PDF document and I send it to you, I retain the original, you got the copy, right? This is a non-scarce good, and the internet is a non-scarce network. And that is beautiful, and the internet makes possible many, many amazing things. But property rights do not apply, because property rights do not apply for non-scarce goods. Therefore, a money cannot exist. Now with Bitcoin, we introduce scarcity into this non-scarce world. Therefore, property rights apply in order to manage who owns what. Therefore, we can exchange our property and our right and ownership of this property, and therefore prices arise. And as soon as we have the prices, we have a money. And now just people need to use it. And if it is a good medium of exchange, store of value, unit of account, people are going to use it. I would even argue that you do not need to have some secondary value, as Mango argues, like the electricity or the shiny jewelry value of gold. We don't need that. That helps the process of starting a money, but if you have a useful money, it will be used.
Yes, that's a good bootstrapping, mechanism because, for instance, I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, but for instance, at first you might not know that a good is actually as scarce as you would want a good to be in order to be a money. But if you're going through the process of having used it, for something else, then perhaps through that process, that's one way in which you learn just how scarce it is. And so, yes, people want to use, X good for Y service or whatever, or X resource for Y good. But until they actually go through that process, they don't know how scarce it is. And once they start to realize how scarce it is, then attention on it becomes more monetarily focused. But there's also I haven't really developed this theory, but so in Bitcoin's proof of work, the important thing is that you have a economic signal, like a signal of opportunity cost. And I've wondered if the sort of reciprocal altruistic nature of money, so to speak, when you're using a money, if it has a secondary usage, if it actually decreases that sort of the signal that money can provide in economic trade. That, like I said, this is something I haven't really developed, but I think it's a question worth asking. Now that we can envision a money that does not really have these secondary characteristics, so to speak, it's pretty much only good for money. Perhaps that's actually a good thing.
I actually really agree, because now we can specialize, right? Division of labor, specialization. And if we have a damn good money, such as Bitcoin, then this is perfect, because we can use it only as a money, and it is not used as anything else. It is just money. That might make it a little bit more volatile, especially in the early phases, which we of course see, but I think this is in the long run really, really good. Although I would like to add that Bitcoin does have secondary use cases. For example, I've done a university degree at the University of Nicosia under the amazing Andreas Antonopoulos, and he issues the certificates of this university degree on the Bitcoin blockchain. So I do have a UTXO in the Bitcoin blockchain that I do not use as money, but I use as a representative of my university degree. So there is one of the many use cases that Bitcoin has other than being a money. But again, I don't think that we need them.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question for you. So I am a two-time graduate of Mises University. I went in 2012 and 2013. 2013 was especially fun. I got to do the constitutional law seminar with Judge Napolitano. So I think he might be there this year. If you see him, tell him I say hello.
Guess who will be joining us for one of the next live streams?
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, he's fantastic. But so my question for you is, how has what do people think about Bitcoin there? And I asked that because in 2013, I was the guy walking around in a Bitcoin shirt for the entire week. I would not shut up about it. A lot of the students were kind of into it. At the time, someone had donated money, so I could just give out some free Bitcoin so people could get it in their hands. And that was great. But a lot of the professors, some of them were kind of like, oh, that's interesting. Some of them were straight up, arguing with me that Bitcoin was nonsensical. And I think part of a lot of that and a lot of the problems Austrian have had to do with the lack of understanding of the technology. If it was up to me, Mises University would be an additional week where you'd cover the Unix philosophy, open source software, the Bitcoin technicals, and then at the end have a hackathon. but alas, they only have 1 week to teach. But anyway, so with that, do you sense from both students and faculty, do you sense much more openness to Bitcoin as this global force that you and I think it is?
Well, first of all, absolutely, we need to have one of those hackathons. If we cannot make it happen at Mises University, we're going to make it happen at the Satoshi Nakamoto University, which I hope you're going to found as well. That will be fantastic. How do the Austrians think about Bitcoin in general? Well, they are open to it, absolutely. They understand the value of anarchy in money, which I'm writing my bachelor thesis on, and competition in money, right? That we now have different private monies that we can choose on the free market. But unfortunately, most of them are, if they want to use Bitcoin more, or if they want to use cryptocurrencies, more of a blockchain, but not Bitcoin.
It's very unfortunate.
Yes. I did a brief call with Jörg Guido Hülsmann, great guy and great economist, and I talked to him about that, but I gave him like a 1-minute briefing on why blockchain is bullshit and Bitcoin is the real thing. Many Austrians also believe that a token-backed gold safe will be the next big thing. So that you put your gold in a vault and then issue a token that you can trade. But I argue that it has the exact same problems as any other safe that has gold in it, and it issues paper receipts. It is a centralized point of failure, and the government can come in, kick in the doors, and take away the gold. So I don't think that in a digital world, a representative token is the best way to do it. We can do it, absolutely, because now we have scarcity in the digital world. But I think what is much more important is the intrinsic value that arises out of Bitcoin, out of its scarcity.
Yeah, of course, like, with the gold thing, like, had they done that, back in 1912, perhaps that would have been how things were, and we would have never even had to consider a Bitcoin-like money. Maybe it would arise, but it would have a much more difficult time competing in this world. But yeah, no, today that's just that's not really an interesting proposition at all. It's merely, and also, sorry, it also doesn't require a blockchain. It would actually be a mistake to even consider that a blockchain per se. As you say, it's a centralized point of failure. All it is a bank using a SQL database to keep track of who is owning things instead of a physical ledger book, such as back in the day. So yeah, had I gone to Mises University this year, I probably would have taken boxes and boxes of Saifedean Ammous's The Bitcoin Standard and just handed it out like Johnny Appleseed.
Absolutely. And Michael, I have this proposition for you, and I'm 100% convinced that we not only should do this, we need to do this. How about we do a lecture with at least 3 Bitcoin maximalists? You, absolutely, Pierre Rochard, and Saifedean Ammous. Saifedean agreed to it. I hope you and Pierre will do as well. We're going to get someone like Walter Block on the panel as well, a really big Bitcoin skeptic with good points. He is not stupid. He's a really smart man. Then we're going to put you guys live in the audience, and we have an audience of students listening. And you talk about Bitcoin maximalism and how it is tied to Austrian economics. Walter Block asks his challenging questions and gives his challenging points. And then we have the students chip in as well. Sound good?
I think that'd be fantastic. When do you guys want to do something like that?
Perfect. And I 100% agree. The Bitcoin Standard is the book in Bitcoin right now. If you want to learn about Austrian economics and how it affects Bitcoin and why Bitcoin is actually the cool thing that we're all talking about, right? Because that guy, if you take his book, What Has Government Done to Our Money, and substitute the word gold for the word Bitcoin, it works perfectly fine, right? And Saifedean did pretty much just that. He just made some additional new points.
Most of the book doesn't even mention Bitcoin. Most of the book is purely about, what is sound money, and why sound money is important, the history of money and how unsound money has, ruined civilization, and how sound money can rebuild it, and then introduces Bitcoin as, hey guys, here's a sound money. We have one today, and it's even in many ways better than gold that we had previously.
Absolutely. And now we have another great Bitcoin maximalist joining us. JW, how are you doing?
Good. How are you guys?
Howdy.
Well, we've just been talking about the importance of Austrian economics in Bitcoin. That it is not just a science project of some cryptographers that sit in their basement, but actually a really fundamental problem that Austrian economics has been writing about for centuries, which is called sound money. So how do you see the importance of Austrian economics in Bitcoin, and especially the education we get of both?
I think it's totally critical. I mean, I think there are a lot of people that are in Bitcoin for a lot of different reasons, but it seems like there's a small group of folks like Michael and Pierre and myself and some other folks like you obviously as well, that we understood the economics before we saw the technology, or maybe in parallel. And without understanding the economics, you don't know what problem you're trying to solve here, right? It's not about, as Saifedean does a really good job saying, it's not about like PayPal 2.0. There's so much more efficient ways to do that. It's about creating a money that can actually compete with government money, because government money is all about using force and violence to impose a monopoly. And we know that monopolies suck when they do anything. And something as important as money, if it's a monopoly, it doesn't just mean that you pay more and have letters delivered slower, like the post office. It means that it completely destroys humans' ability to coordinate together and solve problems. And so as a result of that, if you understand Austrian economics, you understand that if we could ever grab a sound money, it would be like a time machine that would move us forward through history more rapidly. We wouldn't be using MRI machines, we'd be using something better, right? Fewer people would be dying. That the more dead babies thing, I think that's absolutely true. I was saying that before that retard took it and turned it into just a ridiculous crying fest. But the reality is that, that's why doctors get up in the morning, right? That's why we all go to work. We're trying to solve problems and make the world and the universe slightly less chaotic and destructive and slightly more delightful. And if we had a sound money, that would happen a lot more rapidly. So I'm still kind of surprised that there's anybody that's interested in Bitcoin at all that doesn't think that we need to create a sound money. And I'm still amazed that anybody that has like instincts that are good enough to have not read Mises and still thinks that this is an interesting place. They're not wrong, but I'm shocked that they made it here without that, because I had to read a whole lot of pages before I would have thought this was a good idea.
Right. Likewise, I was just saying the same thing. It was years of studying Austrian economics before I even heard of Bitcoin. And it was the only reason that it would have made sense when I came across it. One thing with like people, they think it's all about payments, or, they misuse the word cash, for instance, to describe purely a payment system rather than sort of a finality to a settlement. I would say that gold is a cash. But when they describe these things, like I think a lot of people have trouble imagining that services like Visa, if we want to think in terms of the Bitcoin lingo, like Visa itself is like a layer 3 or layer 4 thing, and so they're wanting to like go think about, how can we decentralize layer 3 or layer 4, and we're saying stop. Let's go down this thing and go to the fundamental root of all of this economic coordination, and let's decentralize that. Some of the layers above might be more decentralized, some might be more centralized, but we can fully decentralize that layer at the bottom, and that is the most important one.
Absolutely, Michael, you bring up fantastic points, and I'm honored to be joined by the one and only Joseph Salerno. He was a student of this guy, Murray Rothbard. He's actually met him. He's talked to him, I imagine, countless of hours until
we were friends.
Many late night sessions, right? And so we were talking about the importance of sound money. What do you think are the important aspects of a sound and a politically neutral money?
I mean, first of all, as you said, politically neutral. We want to separate money from the political machinery. We don't want politicians' whims determine the value of money, which means that the supply of money has to be returned to control by the market.
Absolutely. So Michael, JW, we have here a fantastic economist. I'm sure you have a bunch of questions. Please ask them.
All right, I'm going to jump in because I'm totally excited to meet you.
Oh, nice to meet you. Thank you.
I'm doing a course on Bitcoin and economics, and as I was putting it together, one of the things that struck me harder than it had before is that banking was an inevitable effect or an inevitable outcome of the technology that we had with gold. Because gold had such storage issues, it was inevitable that we were going to end up with banking. And it seems, and maybe it's the benefit of hindsight, maybe it's not an absolute requirement, but it seems like once you have banking, you're going to have central banking, given the access to violence that humans have and extortion. It doesn't seem like we could ever be in a free banking world. And so I'm wondering if you agree with the idea that it had to be a technological advancement in order to get us to a sound money, that it couldn't be just political or education based in order for us to end up in a place where we actually have a money that's difficult for governments to steal, let's say.
Yeah, I think I don't think it was inevitable that that banking would lead to central banking. I mean, if you look at it over the years, especially if you follow the campaign to get the Federal Reserve imposed, it took a long time. It took a made-up ideology on the part of progressivism on the part of the big business to push through undercover the Federal Reserve Act in 1913. I think ideology might be enough. I mean, a libertarian ideology it might be enough to keep us in a state of free banking, depending on how you would define that. But I don't think central banking is inevitable, an inevitable outcome of banking itself. Put it that way.
Yeah, that's interesting. We're on the third central bank in the United States, right?
That's correct. I mean, there were two quasi-central banks: the First Bank of the U.S. and the Second Bank of the United States, both of which were destroyed by Jefferson. In one case, campaigned against the First Bank, and the charter was not renewed. And in the second case, by President Jackson and his followers, and it was destroyed on ideological grounds that it was a monopoly. I mean, people. They had to overcome that issue to ram through the Federal Reserve System. And so they pretended that it was decentralized, that it was sort of privately owned, that it represented the interests of all of these 12 districts, of the farmers, of business, of small merchants, and so on. So they had to cover the fact that it was a monopoly with this ideology.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess I do feel like it was inevitable, but again, it's probably because I'm a little bit younger and didn't see some of the battles and how close some of this stuff was. At this point, do you think that there's any reasonable hope that we're going to end the Fed through political action or education? Or because at this point, from my perspective, we have Bitcoin. I'm a security researcher. It looks like it works. And so for me, it's super black and white. I can't imagine having any hope in anything else at this point. But I'm curious on your perspective and kind of just the Mises Institute in general and the network of really smart folks that I've learned so much from. I'm constantly fascinated that they haven't completely fallen in love with Bitcoin yet.
Well, I think let's just go to how we might end the Fed without really a frontal assault on the Fed. And that would be as following Ron Paul, to say, look, if the Fed's money is so great, it can stand competition. So let us legalize the enforcement of contracts in gold and silver and foreign currencies and anything else that people want to use, including Bitcoin. And let's take all the taxes, excise tax, capital gains tax, sales tax, off of silver, gold, and foreign currencies. In other words, let's not tax their appreciation or depreciation, or their capital gains. So that was the other tax, capital gains tax. Let's get rid of all those taxes and allow people to use those as media of exchange. And let's see which wins out in the marketplace. I'm perfectly willing to allow Bitcoin and gold, silver, foreign currencies. I mean, yen and euro, whatever, to compete with the Fed. And then the Fed having to face that competition would have to be more restrained, certainly, in its production of money.
Just one more quick follow up, and then I'll let Michael ask. The reason that I don't quite understand that idea is that the whole point of what we're trying to do is build something that doesn't require political approval, because we don't believe that we'll get it. But maybe Michael could ask a question. Sorry,
that was basically my question, because we've I watched Ron Paul has had a tremendous career of educating people about the true nature of money and how government intervention ruins money, and he's done a fantastic job. And I've been among the crowds chanting "End the Fed, end the Fed," and yet I haven't actually seen much movement beyond. I did notice that in subsequent political elections, there were more politicians that were kind of, the Federal Reserve was actually coming up as a topic, even if it was just a very minor one that people didn't actually care about. They were still naming it. That being said, I haven't actually seen any political movement around that, and yet on the other hand, Bitcoin has had tremendous success in growing and garnering both positive and negative attention, which I both think are good for Bitcoin in the long run, and thus is actually on a path to winning. And I think that's strategically, I think it's been much more successful.
Here's my optimistic scenario. We had some movement, of course. I mean, people were calling for us to audit the Fed. What we need again, and what we will get in the next year or two, is a collapse, a financial collapse. And with the financial collapse, I think the Fed's really going to be called on the carpet. So I think one of the first steps that we have to take, once that happens, we have to jump on it and push for auditing the Fed, and push even more radically for making the Fed responsible to Congress, just getting rid of its independence. This is, the mantra that they keep repeating. Oh, we have to be independent. We have to be independent of politics. As Murray Rothbard said, absolutely not. Of course, you don't want them independent. These unelected bureaucrats that are responsible to no elected official. You don't want that. You want them to have their budget controlled by Congress. That way, Congress can't use this idea that, hey, we're not causing these fluctuations in prices and production and business cycles. It's the Fed. I mean, it's an independent entity. So we want the politicians to be responsible for the production of money. Now, that's a funny thing for an Austrian to say, but we want people to realize that, really, look, money is political, and now we can throw out the people that are in charge of the money supply. Vote them out. Okay, whereas you can't get rid of these entrenched bureaucrats. So that's I'm sort of optimistic on that front.
That being said, once again, strategically, I think it's very powerful if given my understanding of Austrian business cycles and all of that, a sort of financial collapse is sort of inevitable. If you print out a lot of money that's not actually representing real savings, at some point you have to face reality. That being said, when that actually happens, having the infrastructure in place for a good replacement is a much more persuasive tactic, in my opinion, than hey guys, let's try to learn from failure. I think it's Peter Thiel in some of his interviews. It may have been in 0 to 1, the book itself, but he talks about how failure is kind of overrated, because if you fail, you don't necessarily actually know how to learn from it. So speaking like this, my concern is that, will the politicians actually learn from this one? Because we've been saying how economics works for how long now, and yet, they still prop up the .com bubble. They still prop up the housing bubble and all of these things. They don't seem to learn from this. They still want to do exactly as they always do. But if you kind of force their hand into having to compete with the infrastructure of a global sound money that's already in place, that's gaining traction, and stands to give them such strong competition as to put them out of business, that to me just seems much more powerful than hoping that people learn from an event.
Yeah, well, politicians don't learn; they don't want to learn. But of course, what we need is a mighty populist movement, which, even though it was sort of diverted by sort of Trump, but it shows that people are angry. They're not going to tolerate, political cronyism and corruption any longer. And if we can portray the Fed as being part of that establishment and stoke populism, I think it's not the politicians. The politicians will yield to a strong sentiment on the part of the public. Now, getting to Bitcoin, I think I'm all in favor of having Bitcoin there. And if it wins, it wins. But Bitcoin is not a unit of account yet, in the sense that people are actually universally pricing their goods in Bitcoin. If that comes to pass, all the more power to Bitcoin. But it doesn't seem that we have to do anything for that. You're saying it's gaining traction, it's global, and I've heard this again and again from Bitcoin supporters. And I think that's fine. Let's see it play out. But in the meantime, we also have to continually keep ideological pressure on the state.
Absolutely, yes. I agree with all of those points. If you have time for one more question,
yes.
Because I've read in this in Defense for Freedom that we Austrians do not believe in society, which is just a collection of individuals, right? We put the power to the people, the free human beings that act upon themselves. And now the same is true for Bitcoin. Because in Bitcoin, I run my own full node. I keep my own keys. Therefore, I set my own rules in my money. And if I want to change those rules, I can do it because I have full control over it. Then further, I verify each and every transaction in the network if it plays by my rules. So I'm also the judge in this system, right? But not only do I just verify if they're true, if they are false, I ignore them, I block them. So I am pretty much judge, jury, and prosecutioner in one job. I am the king of my money. I'm the sovereign of my money. And nobody can take that away from me.
Yeah. The problem is that, and it might not be a problem. I mean, it seems like it's being solved, but the key point is that money is a social institution, and everyone must accept it. Now, not in any formal agreement, not by any government fiat or order, but it must be accepted in exchange. And that's how Bitcoin, if it does win out, will win out in that way. In other words, no one had to campaign. The one thing that troubles me about Bitcoin, just a little bit, no one campaigned for gold to be money. Okay, we didn't have a gold movement. Why campaign for Bitcoin? Why not just let it win out in the marketplace? So that makes me just slightly suspicious of how viable it will be. I mean, it seems to be viable now. It's a good means of payment. I don't think it's quite a medium of exchange yet, but I'm willing to learn and watch as events unfold.
Yeah.
So the reason that we're really aggressive about campaigning for it is that it's a asset that works better as money than anything else that we have. It works better as gold. And if we can help people understand how it works and why it works better, they'll adopt it like any new technology. Now, we could wait for people just to realize that over time, but this is what we do. We're technologists, right? If there's a tool that works, we're going to tell you, hey, buy this hammer. It's a better hammer. The thing that's frustrating for a lot of us about the Mises Institute and other folks is that they don't seem to be willing to take the time to realize there is a better hammer. And if you're an educator and you're educating about economics, this is the thing that matters. Stop talking about gold, stop talking about the Federal Reserve, and start talking about Bitcoin, because this is where we have an opportunity to actually make some change.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from, and from the point of view of this idea that we have to, I guess, sort of instruct people in the use of Bitcoin. You know, why should anyone take the time to do that on a market? I mean, to me, it's the consumers that respond. They see something better. They see a better hammer. It doesn't have to be explained to them. Maybe it's advertised a little bit. You don't need specialists with PhDs like myself to go and say, you know, this is a better hammer. So I think I'm just a little bit uncomfortable with being put in a position of, you know, as an economist, having to push against something that's obviously better, or push for, I'm sorry, something that's obviously better. Whereas when I talk against the Fed, I mean, it's hard for people to understand the Fed. So you need economic insights into that. But with Bitcoin, I mean, as you say, it's gaining traction.
Yeah, but
let it roll.
So I'll give you an example of at least a couple of economic fallacies that you yourself have presented in this talk, right? The idea that it's going to be, we need to wait and see if it can be a medium of exchange, or the idea that it's too volatile right now. As a new technology is getting adopted, and that includes money, it's going to be volatile. That's not a downside for a new technology becoming money. And if we don't explain that to people, it could absolutely slow adoption. And that's absolutely the role of economists. And in my view, you guys are absolutely dropping the ball on that.
But I mean, gold came into existence. I'm sure it was volatile in the beginning. And there weren't any economists. I mean, back in the mists of time when metals were starting to dominate. So I didn't say Bitcoin was too volatile at this point. I think it is, but I never made that statement. Look, I'm in favor of any free market invention or way of new procedure, new technology that is adopted by consumers. That's my ultimate test. And so I wish all the luck to Bitcoin. I mean, if it's something that is going to replace or become a real market money, I just don't see wasting all this time. Well, maybe not wasting, but spending all this time instructing the public that this is a better hammer. This is a better hammer. I don't see the point of that.
Have you read Saifedean Ammous's The Bitcoin Standard?
No, he's a friend of mine, and he sent me it, and I haven't read it yet. But I think he's a very good economist, so I will read that. I have it on my.
Yeah, I absolutely. I have my signed copy behind me. I spent the last weekend with him. Highly recommend it. I think it'll perhaps change your view on a lot of these things.
I'll look at it.
Better than I can right now while you have to go.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Joseph Salerno, for joining us.
My pleasure.
And maybe we can get those guys again with Saifedean Ammous.
That would be great. Yeah, yes, absolutely.
Maybe get some students to join us in the audience. That would be fantastic.
That wouldn't be bad. That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay,
yeah,
thank you very much for joining us. Very good. Okay, so JW, you wanted to say something else. Please shoot your question. You're muted.
Yeah, it was it wasn't the volatility. He didn't use the word volatility. He was talking about unit of account, that it's not a unit of account. And that's that's sort of like saying, the internet isn't going to work because everybody's not using it yet. No, the internet worked, and then eventually people adopted it. And yes, we did have people walking around saying, hey, the internet's amazing, you should use it. And it was everything from activists to marketers, to everybody else. I'm sure that when gold was adopted, it was also adopted by people saying, hey, I need to get some chickens. Why don't you use this gold and accept it because it's actually better. That's just how humans work. And I think it's really weird that an academic and somebody that teaches economics wouldn't have a massive interest in a new asset that's been invented that works better as money than anything that's been invented before. That's a very strange circumstance, I think.
I think there's a heavy focus on thinking about money in terms of the sort of universal, because as we know, money is defined sort of as the most liquid good, the most saleable good, and thus a lot of the language and Dr. Salerno uses it's not universally used as a unit of account. At the same time, like I use it as a unit of account. When I make a purchase decision, it runs through my mind, how many Bitcoins am I giving up so that I can purchase this good? And within my specific realm of things, I mean, most of my friends are Bitcoiners. Within our realm, that kind of is. So for us, it is the sort of universal money. All of us treat Bitcoin as our money. So in the same way that, there might be some, small nation that has their money within that context. It is the universal money. Likewise, on the online Bitcoin community, it already is our universal money. And when we use dollars, it feels more like we're trading for a foreign currency so that we can go, purchase things that we need rather than treating it as our ultimate unit of account.
Absolutely. And again, here, we are Austrian economists, right? We are freedom fighters. We fight for the freedom of the individual. And so we have to argue out of the side of the individual. And there it is, just as that. If you as the individual, you as the single user would like to use Bitcoin as your money, you can do so. I've been living only on Bitcoin as my only money since 1.5 years. And it works. And for me, Bitcoin is my unit of account, store of value, and especially medium of exchange. And I no longer have to wait for society, whoever that is, to get on Bitcoin, because I already am on it 100%. So for me, it is my money. I no longer use it.
I disagree. I don't think you're using it as a unit of account, and I think this is exactly the sort of stuff that frustrates me with the economists at large, because they're not here, right? They're very rarely. It was awesome that he was that Joseph Salerno was engaging and having this conversation, but I mean, you are a young guy. You're at a conference with dozens, if not hundreds, of other young guys, and a lot of instructors, and this stuff is not being explored in a way that it should be, given that we're adopting this new technology to use as money. And a unit of account is something that Bitcoin is objectively not. You do not measure how much your net worth is in Bitcoin right now. I guarantee it. It's just too volatile. It goes up and down like crazy. When you pay somebody, I almost guarantee that you pay them, you measure the amount that you're going to pay them in dollars. It's possible that you're one of the weirdos that are saying, I'm going to send you 1 Bitcoin, or let's do a deal for 1 Bitcoin. And then you're having to calculate it in dollars in your head, and they're having to recalculate it in dollars in their head. But that's what a unit of account is. It's the universal measure of value that it's used among a group of people that trade together. And you can't decide that you're going to use it as a unit of account if your landlord accepts dollars, right? It's this, it's a unit of account when it's used by everybody that you do business with. Until then, it's just another asset that you're bartering with.
Perhaps. I think there's a couple of things you can parse out from that. If someone is accepting, okay, let's use the example of going to a foreign country again. If you were to buy a bottle of water in euros, are you using euros as your unit of account as a visitor to a different land?
Well, you actually don't. In a way, you don't have a unit of account, right? In a way, we don't have any unit of account in the world right now when we're trading with each other. But with a group of traders, right? So in the United States, we have a unit of account as the dollar. In Europe, they have a unit of account of a euro, and that allows them to price all goods and services in euros and do profit calculation and math on things that would be impossible otherwise. So it's a description of how you use money. It's not
sure, but saying like that, I can understand your argument once again if we're talking about universal stuff, because in order for me to communicate with someone who is not using Bitcoin as their sort of fundamental money that they're thinking about, then yes, you're going to have difficulty agreeing on a Bitcoin price, but you as the individual can still, for instance, spend dollars or Bitcoins, but be thinking in terms of what are the opportunity costs in Bitcoins.
Exactly. I think we're in a transition.
Think about I spend this, but I still have X amount of Bitcoins, and I did this, and this is going to allow me to get to X number of Bitcoins.
Right. A unit of account is more a description that's used for how a group of people interact together, right? And you could say Bitcoiners, but come on, man, you do most of your economic transactions with non-Bitcoiners, right? So
yeah. I mean, that's like I said, if we're talking about this communication process of how we do it, yes, when I go into them, effectively pricing things in dollars, but I do think it's possible on a individual basis to be thinking of economic calculation in terms of future Bitcoins.
Right. But when Joseph Salerno says unit of account, he's talking about a universal measurement of value among a group of people that trade together. And I this discussion is totally worthwhile and valuable. I know we got to wrap up, but yeah, exactly. And that's my main frustration with all those guys is that the amount of interest that they have in this new technology seems really inappropriate.
Yes, and it's very unfortunate. I was telling him earlier how I was at Mises University in 2012 and 2013, and I spent the entire time in 2013 trying to pitch Bitcoin, and a lot of students were very open to it. There were some professors who who tolerated it. But there was a lot of disinterest from these Austrian economist OGs, and it was rather disheartening. But hopefully they'll come around. If they would all just sit down and read Safe's book, maybe that would help a lot. But we'll see.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, to the unit of account thing, that is always the last thing in the currency that will be established, because only if everybody uses the currency, everybody's going to price his goods and services in this currency. So this is by definition always the last attribute of the medium of exchange stored value unit of account that will happen. And because we are building a grassroots money out of nothing, this will take quite some time. I'm astonished how far Bitcoin has gotten in not even 10 years. So that is fantastic. Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today. JW, was amazing talking to you. Michael Goldstein, thank you very much. And of course, Joseph Salerno, who was amazing. So thank you all for joining us. And definitely, I will be pitching nonstop here at Mises University. Last night, we did a 2.5-hour live stream just talking about Bitcoin and the Austrian views on it. It was amazing, and I will pitch it nonstop. Please, let's make sure that you two guys and Saifedean and Pierre Richard and whoever else of those Bitcoin maximalists and Austrian economists want to join us, that we get you on a live panel with some of the skeptics here, ask the professors, introduce the students in the audience, let them ask questions, and just have a back and forth. Not so short as this one. Let's try to make it a couple of hours that we really can get into depth. So if you're up for that, and if you please let me know. And if you like that, dear audience, please comment under this video, share it with your friends, subscribe to the World Crypto Network. And if you would like to support it, Bitcoin description in the low, please, 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 please support the Mises Institute, founded by that guy, Murray Rothbard. Also, Bitcoin donation in the description below, but it's not yet SegWit, so I have to teach them how to use SegWit. JW, where can the people find you?
You can hit me up at Weatherman. I am on Twitter, or jwweatherman.com. But I just want to say this is awesome, Max, that you're doing this. I would never get on a plane and go to the Mises Institute, but I'm a huge fan of a lot of the guys that are there, and I think it's just amazing that you're doing it. So good job.
Thank you, Michael. Where can the people find you and your stuff?
A couple places. You can follow me on Twitter at Bitstein, BITSTEIN. You can go to the Nakamoto Institute, Satoshi Nakamoto Institute, nakamotoinstitute.org, and also listen to my podcast with Pierre Rochard, the Noted Bitcoin podcast, noted.org, NODED.org.
Absolutely. The Mises Institute, yeah, the Mises Institute is just like the Satoshi Nakamoto Institute, but it was not founded by that guy, it was founded by you, and that is amazing. So thank you for doing that. The Noted podcast is amazing. JW, your show is fantastic. So thank you all for joining us, and see you next time.